Hello, listeners. Welcome to the third episode of the Unlocking the Energy Trilemma podcast with our hosts Ravi Krishnan and Jose A. Martinez, Jam. Today, Ravi and Jam speak with Thierry to decipher the energy cannibalization context and the use of hydrogen to build a different business model. Thierry is a serial entrepreneur in energy and the founder of Hydeal, a developer of green hydrogen projects in Spain and North Africa. He is the author of Hydrogen is the New Oil. Thierry was EVP Technology and Innovation at Engie, and previously the founder and president of Solar Redirect, a global pioneer of solar power, which built 3 gigawatts of capacity on 4 continents at prices as low as $20 per megawatt hour. Ravi, Jam, over to you.
Thierry, welcome to our podcast. It's titled Unlocking the Energy Trilemma, and we have been talking about the complexities around the energy transition around the world. This is the third edition of our podcast, and I've been very eagerly reading about your company, HyFloor, which deals with a lot of hydrogen projects around the world. And from the material that I read, you believe that there is currently an overcapacity in renewable energy market leading to wastages and resulting in negative energy prices. And the situation presents an opportunity to utilize the excess renewable energy for the production of hydrogen, serving both as a cost-effective fuel and energy storage medium. In what way can the surplus renewable energy in the market, which is primarily characterized by the negative prices, be effectively harnessed to facilitate the production of hydrogen for either as a fuel or as an energy storage medium?
Surplus energy, that's an interesting concept. What we have today is far insufficient supply of renewable energy if we want to replace fossil fuels. But you can possibly look at excess energy on a short-term basis. And it's true that today, if you look at the European power market, you have excess power, excess renewable power with wind and solar at some times. And one conclusion that you could draw is that, hey, how can I take advantage of that excess power and make something else or serve needs, produce hydrogen or store it, etc. But it's not sufficient. You need to take a systemic view. And the systemic view is that we're moving into a world where, say, Europe by 2030 expects to have 60% solar and wind. So what we are talking about here is not just a few megawatt hours here and there in excess. It's the vast majority of that solar and wind power will not be used when it's produced. So that's a totally different story. You need to take not just a market or trading approach where saying, I'm going to use that excess power when it comes. I'm going to see how I can maintain the system security, maintain the market business models behind that. And that means a totally different approach than what has been done so far, especially with batteries, which have a short-term approach to managing excess power from renewables.
Does it mean that the energy transition without, let's say, energy storage is on risk?
We have to see that the energy transition is going to be solar plus wind, period. If you want 100%, because that's what we're talking about ultimately, 100% renewables, you can have a bit of hydro when you have hydro, you can have a bit of biomass, you can have a bit of biogas and things, but overall, it's going to be the vast majority of it, it's going to be variable renewables. And you don't power a system with variable renewables. And I would even go further. You want molecules. Ultimately, 80% of the world today world energy is molecules. Oil, gas, and coal. You're not going to replace those molecules with electrons, or partially, yes, that's electrification, but it's going to be just a partial thing. So the fundamental thing here is how you transform those variable, very abundant, and now extremely competitive solar and wind. That's the great news. We have plenty of very cheap energy around the world. How you replace it how you turn that into something which is useful for all users in industry, in energy, and in mobility.
Mhm. So when you couple solar and wind with energy storage, are you talking more in terms of short duration energy storage? Are you talking in terms of long duration, greater than 4 hours? Do you think the technology has matured enough to provide the high round trip efficiency that you need and the cost competitiveness that you would need to achieve that high level of availability through renewable energy resources?
Energy storage, that's a big question. Now, the problem with that word is that it covers different realities. I'll give you an example. Right now, the objective of the European Union is to have 200 gigawatts battery storage by 2030. That seems a lot, but in terms of energy, it's around 400 gigawatt hours. 400 gigawatt hours. Now, if you look at the total gas storage capacity right now in Europe, already it's over 500 terawatt hours. That's what you can have in salt caverns, in aquifers, and where you actually store energy. So it's 1,200 times bigger. So if we're talking about having a system where you have vast quantities of solar, which are not just produced in the day, they're produced in the spring and summertime. If you want to cover not just a few days in the wintertime, but the whole fall and wintertime, then you need, you could argue, long-term mass scale storage. And this is where batteries, unfortunately, which can only cover a few hours at max, don't foot the bill. You need to have something that guarantees everything. And there again, storage, when people think storage, they think power system. Then again, let's not forget that even if you do 100% renewables for power, you're left with 80% of energy, which requires molecules. And even if you do electrification, in the case of Europe, by the way, electrification is a slow moving thing, you're far from having a decarbonized system. Ultimately, you need to think not just power, but the whole system, including molecules, which are actually the things that we need to displace if we want to decarbonize.
And now we are having a lot of wind and solar. It's going to increase the capacity. We don't have enough storage. So we are having a perverse situation in the market because very cheap renewables are flooding the market in some moments, are even creating situations with zero price or negative prices in the electricity system. And my question is this situation stopping or driving other energy sources such as hydrogen to develop?
The cannibalization effect, which we're talking about, is considerably underestimated. And I'll give you two figures regarding, for instance, the German market. Germany had 25 days in 2022 where the solar hours were at zero or negative prices. That's 2022. In 2023, it moved up to 62 days. And just in March, last month, just in March, it was 9 days. Just in 1 month, actually a winter month. So you can see that there's an exponential growth of those zero pricings, and we're going to get to a point where way over 50% of a solar profile is going to be valued at zero or less in Germany, but Germany and France are in the same so-called copper plate, and Spain is as well in the same situation. So you're seeing a situation which is actually very problematic. Now, lots of people have thought, I know what's going to happen. People are going to charge these things when there is too much wind or too much solar, or there's going to be a natural adjustment. And the problem is that natural adjustment is not happening. It's not happening because there's far less flexibility in the system, what most people think. And most importantly, there's no business model. The business model of people having this flexibility for a limited price is actually very limited. And this is where we're seeing that we have quite something inflexible in terms of demand, something extremely inflexible in terms of variable power, which is skyrocketing. And the two getting together, it's not pretty.
In terms of your hydrogen technology that you currently utilize as a developer, how critical is the location of the project as well as the type and the nature of the electrolyzer technology? How critical is it to the overall production cost of hydrogen? And what do you think is that sweet spot where you need to be to make hydrogen viable as an enabler for the energy transition?
Hydrogen will have two business models. One business model is I would call that the arbitrage business model, is to leverage on that zero valued power, which is skyrocketing. We're talking about hundreds of terawatt hours coming very soon, huge volumes. Now, transforming these things which are valued at zero or about zero into something valuable, which is hydrogen, is going to be a very profitable business. And that will leverage on existing facilities in Europe. Now, obviously, this is not going to be pretty for everyone because the solar and wind asset owners are going to realize that maybe somebody's going to buy the power from them. It's going to go buy it at very low prices, less than 20 euros per megawatt hour. So it's basically a floor approach. And the other approach where you want to produce, I'd say, additional hydrogen, that's if we want to fit in, by the way, into the criteria of additionality, which is a very important one. Mm-hmm. You cannot have additional power in Europe, in our opinion, for one very simple reason, is that the market, the hydrogen market, which is really driven by the natural gas market. And we've seen customers and industries telling us on and on, we will never buy hydrogen above 2.5 euros delivered per kilogram. Now, how do you get that level of things? You get it because you have power costs below 20 euros per megawatt hour. And there's only one place in Europe where you can get there. We thought that was Spain. Now we think that it's not in Europe. It's further south. It's in North Africa. And this is where we think that what is going to shape up is a Mediterranean architecture where that very cheap hydrogen from North Africa, which can be also very cheaply moved to Europe via pipelines, because transmission costs are fundamental here. So we are looking at two business models here, two monstrously big business models. One which is producing the cheapest, by far the cheapest hydrogen from solar and wind in Morocco, Mauritania, and other North African countries. And the other one which is to leverage on these stranded assets, you could argue, call them that way, stranded renewable assets, which are going to pop up everywhere in Europe.
Larry Fink from BlackRock sent the typical annual letter, and he was speaking about energy pragmatism, okay, showing that probably the calculations, the expectations, the transition pace that we were setting, they were too optimistic, okay? So my question is, all this investment, all this additional investment, for example, on hydrogen or renewables, are gonna affect, they are gonna impact the final bill of the electricity user. Do you think that impact is going to be positive? Is going to be negative? What's your opinion about that?
I fully agree with Larry Fink. I fully agree with the CEO of Saudi Aramco. I fully agree with the CEO of ExxonMobil who are saying anybody who thinks that people are going to buy hydrogen, I'm quoting, at $400 a barrel equivalent, is dreaming. And right now in Europe, we have tons of people who are just waiting for the government to bridge the gap between 100 and 400. Now, times 100 million barrels a day, we're talking about trillions of subsidy, which are not going to happen. So I fully concur with the pragmatic approach. The pragmatic approach is say, what can the customer buy? And the customer buys, it's either industry or it's in private citizens. And the idea that you're going to increase the bills of private citizens, we've seen that in France. We had the Arc de Triomphe burn, and I can tell you, French government doesn't want to try it again. The idea that consumers or taxpayers are going to pay for that luxury Louis Vuitton style energy transition is not going to happen. It's not going to happen in Europe. And guess what? It's not going to happen India, in Africa, in China, or all the countries which are looking at cheap energy, and rightfully so. There is no alternative to market-driven hydrogen, and that's a commodity approach. Either you deliver the 2.5 euros, which is roughly $100 a barrel of oil, which is equivalent to the carbon thing. We call that the fossil fuel parity, or you're not. And if we're not, I would agree with then again the CEO of Saudi Aramco that the energy transition is over. It's dead. It's dead because we cannot match. You cannot bridge that gap.
Yeah, it's
so, yes,
unaffordable.
Very big challenge.
Mm-hmm. And in your view, how can stakeholders collaborate to further reduce the production cost of green hydrogen, making it more competitive globally, given all the ongoing advancements in technology and standardization efforts?
The problem with a hydrogen, as an investor was telling me, lots of moving parts.
Mm-hmm.
And let's build those moving parts. Let's start with the downstream. The first thing that you need is to have customers, users getting together in hubs and where they're aggregating demand in locations, whether that's steelmaking, chemicals, power, heat, all these things. They need to get together and say, we are aggregating demand. That's one thing. This is what we are doing, by the way, at Ideal. The other thing that you need to do is to work quite on the opposite side, on the upstream side. And then you need to have developers who are working with government. And when, for instance, the Moroccan government earmarks 1 million hectares for green hydrogen, an announcement which was made a couple of weeks ago, which means the equivalent of 40 million tons of green hydrogen. That says something. Space, you want water, by the way, as well. And then you want all those different developers, yes, again, aggregating. So it's aggregating demand, aggregating producers. And in the middle, you want to have two things. You want to have infrastructure. This is working with the pipeline companies, working with the underground storage companies is important. And you know what they're asking? They're asking for, I'm quoting, capacity reservation. But capacity reservation for pipelines will not come if producers and consumers don't agree on volumes and prices and sign long-term contracts. Now, the other fundamental thing that you need to have around that is finance. It's finance both by bringing people together, that's the trading approach of finance, and then it's obviously the financing, debt and equity. And debt and equity will only come if there are long-term contracts at market prices. And this is unlocking this is indeed very complex. It needs bringing people together. But once you have found, let's say, the right mechanism, it can unfold and unlock things in a crazy fashion. This is our conviction. The minute these things are brought to a solution, it's like the ketchup approach. Ketchup moves down the bottle very quickly.
You speak about the stakeholders, you speak about finance. What about timing? Do we have time? Because these infrastructures take a lot of time to deploy. You cannot deploy a pipeline of 1,000 kilometers from Morocco to France in one day. So what about the timing? The timing regarding the transition timeline that we all set.
You're asking the fundamental question, how fast can it be done? And I'll start with the pipelines because you're asking the pipelines. How long did it take to build, sorry, I'm going to use a very famous example, Nord Stream 2. Engineering, permitting, there's no much permitting, is it? Design, construction, 3 years. 3 years for a $15 billion project. How long does it take for Enagás? Enagás just made an announcement for 2,500 kilometers of pipelines. How does it, and we've worked very, very closely with them, so I can tell you, how long does it take to go permitting? A year. How come? Why? Because you have, you're using the right of way of existing pipelines. You're not going to go in the countryside and ask 1,000 landowners if you can go through their land. That would take forever. But their pipelines are ready. The right of way exists. And the idea, the plan here from Enagás is very simple. It's to build next to existing pipelines, permitting 1 year. How long does it take for engineering? 1 to 2 years. Construction, 1 to 2 years. Within 3 to 5 years, you can have, that means before 2030, you can have over 2,000 kilometers of pipelines built in Spain. So how long does it take? Not much. Underground storage takes a little more time. You have engineering studies. You need to wash the salt caverns if you have salt caverns. So we're talking about 5 to 7 years. Now, the beauty is that on the upstream side, and this is where it needs to be thought in parallel fashion, how long does it take to build a solar park? I can tell you, it's been my business for a while. If you have the permit well, and if you have all these things happening, it can be built in 2-3 years maximum. I'm talking about super large things. Electrolyzers, we need the electrolyzer industry to ramp up, but it's already the case in Asia, especially China. So if you put all these moving parts together, and yes, under the umbrella of a long-term contract, where all the parties get together, then can be very fast.
Mm-hmm. Thierry, as we approach a hard stop here, why don't I pose this question to you? There are a lot of options out there and a lot of potential pathways to achieve the energy transition, whether you're talking about modernizing the grid, adding more renewables, hydrogen, carbon capture, digitalization, electric vehicles. There are many different pathways that people are pursuing. And in your view, is hydrogen really the winning horse? Do you believe that hydrogen is going to be the key enabler to achieve the net zero and decarbonization objectives that many industrial and energy facilities around the world are trying to accomplish to meet their sustainability goals? Give us some of your thought on that.
It's binary. Right now, you have all the hydrogen skeptics having a great time. Why? Because as the IEA told us, only 3% of hydrogen projects in the world have reached FID, final investment decision. Very few. Why? Because you have this huge gap between producers who roughly want to sell their product between 4 and 8 euros per kilogram, sometimes far more, and users who want 2 to 3 euros and or less in the case of the US. Now, how do you bridge that gap? If you don't bridge it, hydrogen will stay as a pipe dream. Nothing will happen. And many people are right now saying, I told you. I won't name very famous people who are making their blogs and having a field day today saying, I told you hydrogen would never happen. But if you match that, the power of the market is mind-boggling. And this is what we're aiming at Hydeal, bringing together producers and off-takers in what we call the 2.5 challenge. It's a challenge, but it's not beyond reach. And once you have that, you're unlocking everything. Because it's like finding oil in 150 years ago and bringing it to New York and replacing whale oil at a price which is lower than whale oil and more abundant and, by the way, more sustainable. So we're talking about really a Standard Oil moment, which our conviction is we're around the corner for this. But yes, it's a challenge. It's a challenge, and we call that the 2.5 challenge.
Mm-hmm. There's also an argument on, again, there's an argument on when you use hydrogen for power generation, for example, there's efficiency losses around the use of the electrolyzer, and then further efficiency losses in burning it as a fuel in a combustion turbine, resulting in some cases, net efficiency of about 34%. What is your view on that? Is that something that will be overcome in the years to come, or is it something that is very case specific?
I think it's very theoretical. If you have dispatchable power available at any time close to your home, use it, and you will avoid any conversion. Now, if that power is produced 3,000 kilometers away in the Sahara Desert and will not be brought to your home exactly when you need it, for instance, if you're a data center, you need 24/7, a 99.99%, you will not rely on your variable solar and wind to do that, period. You need something that you can fully depend on at any time. And that's the price, yes, of efficiency loss. Now, if you're talking about a very cheap electron in the south, convert it into a molecule which is at that 2.5 level, which is roughly the price of oil today. That is a good price. And now efficiency, we know what the efficiency of internal combustion engine is. It's not very good. And yet it's okay in economic terms, not in climate terms, but it's okay in economic terms. We have a very extremely bad efficiency when we take our cars every day, at least for those who have not moved to electric. And yet it makes sense from a business standpoint. And hydrogen is the same thing. Efficiency is an important thing, but if the raw material that you're talking about is super cheap and extremely abundant, and ultimately is delivered to the consumer at an acceptable price, with the acceptable, say, level of security and its zero carbon, your trilemma, who will say no to that? Nobody. Even people who make those efficiency calculations will at one point say, after all, I'm a driver too.
Fantastic. One last task. Thierry, if you had a magic wand, what would you recommend to unlock the energy trilemma? What do you suggest?
We need to, I will bring people together. I would bring to people, that is what we have done on a small scale basis at Heidel. I would do that at a COP event and saying, all right, now we are all going to work, all the energy companies, all the infrastructure companies, all the energy users, all the financiers, and we're all going to organize and structure those deals. We're going to sign deals. For me, the key here is signing deals. And what we had, I'm not signing expressions of interest, commitments that nobody will respect at those conferences, etc. I'm talking about financial deals. We need to bring those people, and yes, we need to share an objective. So our humble, or maybe not that humble, vision is that we think that 2.5 is where everyone can get together. The suppliers, the producers, the off-takers, the financiers, everyone can get together, obviously with different situations, different geographies. Now, we need those people to get together, not just to talk, but to sign deals. So that would be my Aladdin lamp. Let's make deals.
Thank you very much, Thierry. It has been a pleasure to count on you in the Unlocking Energy Trilemma podcast. And we'll keep in touch. We'll listen to you in the next conferences and so on. Thank you very much, Thierry.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Thierry. And that ends our podcast today. We'd like to thank Jose's followers and my followers as well for tuning in. Look forward to more such interesting topics with experts such as Thierry in the days and weeks to come. Thank you.
We hope you liked this conversation. Follow us on LinkedIn or subscribe for free to the podcast on the platform of your choice, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, or Apple. Because in the next episode, Ravi and Jam will speak with another expert in the industry to unlock the energy trilemma.